So hi everyone, with me today is Rachel Worsley. Now Rachel Worsley is the founder of Neurodiversity Media, plus you've got a whole host of other achievements which we'll let you talk about. But Rachel, Neurodiversity Media is a company which creates resources for people, for neurodivergent employees, let's say with ADHD or autism or anything like that. And maybe before I go any further, do you want to talk about your company itself and what you do?
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of Neurodiversity Media, and I describe it as a media company that creates accessible information resources that unleash the potential of neurodivergent people in the workplace, but also helping their support network or families and friends, as well as employers, with kind of the same knowledge, I suppose. So what's sort of contained, the main product we have is the resource library, which contains articles, infographics, and on sort of neurodiversity in the workplace. And it's just about based on scientific research, based on the evidence of what are the best strategies, tools and tips that we can use to help neurodivergent people in the workplace. Because the idea is there's all this knowledge kind of in this space, but it's not being made accessible in terms of being tailored to people's learning styles, and also just simply understanding how to use these tools to best help everybody. So that's kind of what we are in a nutshell.
Now, people can go to your website and read up about yourself, but maybe I just want to talk a bit more about that. So how did this all come about? How did you come to establish this, or you saw a need for it?
So for me, I have autism and ADHD. I was diagnosed officially in 2018 at the age of 25 after a career in medical journalism, and then I was studying a law degree at the time. I worked in marketing law firms, but I just realized I just sort of struggled to pay attention. Little simple things were really difficult to do. I was always very emotional. I was always struggling with just, lots of stuff that I just thought was, hard, like easy for some people. But I'm like, cooking's difficult for me and that sort of thing. And so for me, it just all added up when I did my research and went, okay, maybe it is ADHD, autism, got the diagnosis. And then I tried looking for information, to help me at work and to explain to my boss what I could do, what they can do to help me. And I found basically a lot of misinformation and a lot of, just jargon and just nothing that was helpful. And so I felt that as part of that journey in trying to understand myself, my ADHD, my autism, I kind of realized, we need to get this information out there to everybody. So I started Neurodiversity Media to help organizations who were trying to help others better communicate their message. But then I just decided to do the journalism myself, put out a newsletter, and I eventually turned it into a platform called the Resource Library to ensure that people had this ongoing source of information in a one-stop shop sort of platform.
Now, you said there before you weren't diagnosed until you were 25. Now, why so late in the piece?
It's got a lot to do with the stereotypes and the prejudice and stigma around autism and ADHD, especially in women. A lot of people believe that, autism and ADHD only happens in boys and not in girls or women. And so lots of people like me, especially for us, we are able to mask our symptoms, or we're just able to compensate better through, our high IQ, or just simply just having to conform as part of being a woman in society. So, a lot of that just gets flown under the radar. There's a lot of miseducation of doctors around sort of like, what ADHD autism is in women. So it's just sort of this compounding cycle of a lack of, evidence, a lack of information, education, and just this widespread stigma and prejudice that's often reinforced by mainstream media. And I guess that was sort of one of the biggest sort of challenges for me, was sort of being from a media background, and, journalism had given me a good start in the working professional world, but just realizing that it also basically erased people like me from being represented and actually identify as people worth supporting.
It was quite interesting because this was a complete coincidence, but I was watching Love on the Spectrum for the first time. I don't know if you've seen that series.
Yes.
But there's a lady in there who I think she got diagnosed when she was 18 or 19 or something like that. And I thought it was just and then she said the similar thing to what you were saying. There's nothing really around women with that. It's all men, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so common now, and I think by having more and more of these stories hit like the mainstream media, through the ABC, and also just like just say hear mentions of women with ADHD all the time now on the radio. It seems to be at least once a week compared to nothing at all, for years. It's just hopefully, opening people's eyes to just different ways that ADHD autism present, especially in women, because I think that's it. There's such a huge cost for not being diagnosed early. I think, lots of people misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression for years and years, and when it's actually untreated ADHD, and they may have those conditions as well, but actually what really helps to manage anxiety and depression is just actually treating the ADHD, because ADHD has medication as one tool out of many tools to treat it. It can be very effective, more effective than antidepressants, really, in a lot of cases. So I think it's that's why, for me, it feels like a public health issue, almost as big as diabetes, really, especially for women, because it just changes, it changed my life, having this diagnosis and accessing the treatment and the knowledge and understanding of why my brain works differently from everybody else. I think everyone deserves the same kind of access to that sort of treatment and understanding of who they are.
Why do you think in the research that there's been such a disparity then? Like, you'd think being, people who study this sort of stuff, it's all, I just find it really, I'm going to keep harping on that point, that's all focused on boys or men, whereas there's nothing for women. I just find it I just find it really hard to reconcile.
Yeah, it's, I guess I'm very lucky that having worked in medical journals and then having lots of contact with GPs and doctors on, day to day, and understanding medical school especially, right, is that medical school and medicine has traditionally been very patriarchal, very male focused. And then as a result, it kind of trickles into the research in academia, where a lot of the studies done around autism and ADHD been focused on male presentations, and it's just simple things like not even considering women were worth studying at all. Those kind of scientific decisions means then it's just sort of very easy to dismiss a problem when there's no data or research to back it up, right? And so part of what I do at Neurodiversity Media is even just start pulling out the data and research, and it's actually one of the most popular pieces, because people, if you don't even know what the data is or what the stats are or what even the evidence is to support your argument that this should be a problem to address, then no one will ever take you seriously. Or no one will take this problem seriously. So that's kind of where I'm at.
What's some of the data or the findings you could probably... What are some interesting ones that you know off the top of your head?
Well, I think, for example, just kind of, it's kind of a good question. So some of the statistics or neurodiversity employment statistics, I suppose, is simply just knowing that, for example, in 2018, there's 205,000 Australians with autism, which was a 25% increase back in 2015. So just even knowing that the prevalence is increasing, but also putting context around it by saying that it's actually because of better diagnosis. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's of women too, not because it's become an exploding problem. Just the fact that, 34.1%, if sticking to autism, right, is sort of that's a high unemployment rate, 34.1%. That's 3 times the rate of people with disability, general disability. And that's huge for autism alone, and just even so, this is just sort of stats drawn from an article that we've put together on it, 22 stats in neurodiversity. It's sort of those kind of stats, when you sort of say it out loud and show people that this is a huge problem, and just for this one condition, very disproportionately compared to other ones. Yeah, for me, I just find that's kind of really concerning. But the problem is you don't hear about those stats. It's actually in the research papers. You just spend all this time looking at research papers and just pull it all out.
Yeah, you almost need to, that's why I was taking back to that show before. Do you think that show was sort of good in a way, and at least raising some awareness to some level, especially with, let's say, that the young lady who didn't get diagnosed till 19? Just because I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, I think shows like that can be really helpful as long as the producers have done extensive consultation with the community. So actually, I personally myself have spoken to those producers before in the past, offering my perspective, and they've come across as being really supportive of really consulting and listening to the community. I think it's also really showed a little bit more in season 2 as well. Just about trying to ask the right questions to get those kind of insights, to show the misconceptions and all of that. So I find it really comes down to mainstream portrayal. It's really taking that time to engage the community, understand, and ask those really good questions to kind of elicit these insights and representations that we wouldn't otherwise know about.
Now, who champions the cause in your eyes in regards to, let's say, the mainstream? Obviously with mental health is generally associated with Beyond Blue and Headspace, but there's a lot of other sub-causes that don't get that much attention. So is there any sort of big organisation, or who really champions it in your area?
That's a very good question, I suppose. Look, there are there's organizations. So with neurodiversity, even the concept itself, right, is, I sort of, even that definition really is, to give some context, is it was invented by an Australian sociologist based in Sydney called Judy Singer, right? Most people didn't realise neurodiversity was an Australian concept. This was invented back in 1998, and it's only been the last few years that's really kind of taken off. But originally it was meant to kind of describe autism, Asperger's syndrome. It sort of then, also went into ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, which is like struggles with coordination movement, dysgraphia, struggle with writing, or dyscalculia, struggle with the numbers, Tourette syndrome. But, others have also talked about it in terms of bipolar and mental health. So it's sort of quite broad, right? But I look at more in the neurological sense, I suppose. How that relates is that in terms of one organization that represents it, it's been very condition specific. Because when you look at all these conditions that are supposed to cover neurodiversity, you would say the biggest, loudest ones would be, say, Autism Awareness Australia, or ADHD Australia, or ADHD Foundation. There's so many different ones, right? Just to even mention that. I do know there's an organisation called Neurodevelopmental Australia that's trying to bring it all together. But yeah, we're still in the really early days of an organisation that truly represents neurodiversity. But also I feel like maybe it's kind of the point as well. It's sort of like if you try and be one to represent it all, that doesn't always work. Sometimes it's just about having organisations with their own niches, but then it's about actually creating some kind of way of better collaboration through all of them to represent neurodiversity.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. So the stats, as you said, it's really important to have statistics when you try and do these sort of things. People can relate to it. And it's quite a large number. I don't think people realise how many people have autism and these sort of things. I don't think people actually understand the numbers. And as you said, it's not becoming more prevalent. It's becoming better known, and there's obviously more things like that. But I just think it's such an under resourced from what I can tell. There's not much awareness as a champion cause or some sort of, let's say, celebrities or someone pushing this sort of thing. And I just think it's for how many people would know someone who got this sort of condition. It's quite disappointing.
It's just crazy. I mean, it feels like everyone I talk to, like even if it's nothing to do with work, the supermarket, all that, it's like every second person I talk to, they're like, oh, I know, a family who's got a child's autistic, or my child's autistic, or I know this. It's sort of like, but it's sort of, well, it is pretty much where neurodiversity was like mental health 20, 30 years ago. Like everybody kind of knew somebody who struggled, but just didn't want to talk about it openly, or didn't have a forum or some kind of organized effort that we see in mental health now to talk about it. So that's where neurodiversity is pretty much in that dark ages or 20, 30 years ago with mental health.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Rachel, and I think that's a really good analogy for it, because I'll give you an example. I used to play footy with kids, and we used to have, let's say, occasionally you'd have a kid, let's say, with special needs, and sometimes there might be a kid, he's got autism, and sort of you don't really, no one explained to you what it is. They just said, this kid's got autism, so this poor kid's in there, trying to fit in with the team or whatever, and you're just told this is a label. You don't understand what it means or anything, but you try and you treat them like anyone else. But I reckon you're right. You hit the nail on the head with that. It's probably 20, 30 years probably from where mental health was in regards to the awareness or people having knowledge of it for such a common issue, which is becoming more and more. It's
crazy, I think, and it does come back to, just even getting the data to a certain how many people have it. Because even with the data there, right, it's sort of like, it's still kind of an underestimate, right? Like that's kind of it. It's sort of because you're presuming the numbers are based on people who actually go on to get a diagnosis. Now, lots of people, including adults today, don't pursue a diagnosis for lots of reasons, mostly including its costs and effort and time. And so many self-diagnose, but that's not captured by the statistics, and many people live their entire lives or years probably having it for sure, display all the symptoms. They work in workplaces who are very tolerant and go away with it and fine, and they just don't know. So it's sort of like, it's a huge problem when you look at the most up-to-date stats, but I go, it could still be a lot more, because I just think it's just an underestimate.
So what's the barrier to getting a diagnosis for someone if they thought they had it? What's the cost, or what's the barrier there?
The cost is probably the biggest one, because it also really depends on how thorough you want to do it, right? I think my ADHD diagnosis, in a sense, and then confirmed with autism as well, it was $500 for my first appointment with a private psychiatrist, especially
A lot of money. And no subsidy. No subsidy or nothing.
No, not really. Actually, was it, if it's Medicare, even then I still had to pay more than $400 out of pocket for that one. Because I guess, especially speaking specifically on ADHD, it's not something, believe it or not, that's treated in public hospitals. Public hospitals do not treat ADHD, which is ridiculous. It's only ever done through the private psychiatry system, and that's a really huge, sort of out-of-pocket cost. And not only that, it's sort of the NDIS in general hasn't really recognized ADHD as a disability worth funding, unlike autism, and yet ADHD is disabling for a lot of people. So then that's a huge cost as well to get kind of supports. So there's the support, there's sort of the cost of getting to get the diagnosis in the first place. Medication for ADHD could be an issue, for example. And just sort of, that's for me, I just always think that's the main barrier is the cost.
That's crazy for me because hearing that, because I remember growing up, you'd always have a kid or, kids in your class, you would have ADD or ADHD and they'd have various forms of medication or something. So I had no idea that was not a public health. It's not on public health at all. It's all done external. Yeah,
it's just crazy. And, it's not until and even the medications for ADHD, there's been huge disparities, right? It wasn't until January this year that, for example, Vyvanse, which is a long-acting form of dexamphetamine, which is what I take, was actually subsidized. There was only $20, $30. People were paying $120 a month just for months.
Really?
It was just crazy. It's just that because of that disparity and that lack of interest, and it just took fair bit of lobbying for that to even get some kind of parity. Like if someone's diabetes medication was that expensive, it'd be an our range, So
yeah, and it's sort of and I'm not saying I completely agree. And it's something that's not brought on by anything. It's just something that you have. But I find it astounding still because, as I said, growing up, a lot of kids I knew would have ADD, they have ADHD, they have the Dex, the Dexies or whatever they would have, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just amazed to hear that it wasn't on Medicare or even back
I should
then.
quickly clarify, right? So the cost itself, the reason why it was exorbitant was actually there was an unfair disparity of when you were diagnosed with ADHD. So you were diagnosed below 18, your medication options were pretty subsidized. It was pretty okay. And people at least believe that ADHD is in kids, right? But if you were unlucky enough to be diagnosed after the age of 18, as I was, until recently with Vyvanse, for example, you had to pay $120 out of pocket just because you were unlucky enough not to have a doctor who actually understood you below the age of 18 gave you that diagnosis. It was ridiculous. There was no scientific evidence base to justify that. There were submissions that were rejected in the past, which I read, that was there's no evidence that it's actually good in an adult population. I'm like, what's the difference between ADHD as a kid and going as an adult? There's no evidence.
You don't grow out of it, do you?
It was just because it's that cost benefit analysis. And obviously because at the time it was that's a bit of a slippery slope maybe to subsidize medication for hundreds more people as an adult. But it was really based on this, some of it is really based on this really misguided notion that you grow out of ADHD when you're an adult. No, you don't. ADHD is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. It don't grow out of it.
Yeah. I think that's an assumption that a lot of people have, Rachel, is what you said. Then people think you have it as a kid and then you grow out of it. But as you said, it's clearly that's not the case.
No. And, I think that's why a big part of the discussion that we need to have, right, is there's a lot of these misconceptions you have to tackle. And the best way to do that is to continue to have really proper media representations of people like myself and others, right, to show that actually it really does affect a lot of people in the cross-section of society, especially professionals, who hold successful jobs. It's not to say it's not important to think about those who are really vulnerable, and that's that whole spectrum too as well. But that's kind of it. There's this whole sort of subsection of us. There's lots of us, who may look successful on paper, but we are really struggling in lots of different areas of our mind that causes a lot of problems of society.
Now, with ADHD, a lot of people will know the words or know the letters, but they probably won't. They might have some idea, but they won't understand. So, what is ADHD to you, and what was it like before and after you sort of found out you had that condition?
Yeah, so ADHD really, it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which in a sense, lots of people say it's a bit of a misnomer because it's not really a deficit of attention that we struggle with. It's the regulation of that attention span. So what that just basically means is that for someone like me, it was it was just very hard to pay attention to things that do not interest me. So it's kind of based on the idea that the ADHD brain is interest wired. So it is always like all of us are interest wired, but what I'm saying with ADHD, it's an extreme. It's like either you're super interested in one thing or you're just not super interested in. Most people are just sort of kind of at least nicely in the middle and go both, one side or the other side. But we're like, oh, that side or that side. And it's the extremes that is what characterizes a diagnosis of ADHD. So for me, it's sort of like I can be very hyper-focused on things like English and writing and spend hours and hours and hours, but even doing maybe a simple thing like, I don't know, put the bins out or just like, or just losing all my like travel cards in, Opal cars in New South Wales, right? I just, I had like, I still have a pile of 30 of them that I just dug out the other time. But losing them so much all the time, you just do the simple checklist or whatever and you still lose them. It's just that extremeness of that disorganization because you just don't remember or pay attention to that. And then that causes that distress because you go, but why can't I just do that? Like, why can't I just not keep losing it or that? And then I can focus 12 hours and remember every single thing in this project. And that extreme sort of nature for me, right, was sort of, it kind of always kept offsetting itself, but it just causes mental health breakdown half the time because it's just so, and so what with the diagnosis, it was just sort of being able to take medication, but also learn how my brain works. So I know how to optimize my interest brain to work on things I like, but have, sort of guidelines or guardrails to kind of make sure I still do the other important things in my life, And that's kind of it, right? So the moment you kind of understand that's how your brain works and there's actually nothing wrong with it, you just learn how to optimize your life to focus on things you enjoy and then make sure you get support and help from other people or put in strategies to manage things that you're not good at. And so that's been the difference for me getting the diagnosis.
And you've obviously been able to harness the good part of it to be, to do a law degree with honours, to do the business you're doing where you did marketing, journalism. So you've been able to harness that part in that way as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Rachel, because it's sort of it really does come down to some people have been like me have been able to compensate, I suppose, by but often in a destructive way. And I guess that's been a really interesting reflection of my experience too. Was like for me, I go. Lots of people with ADHD may sort of try and compensate by alcohol and drugs and all that. I was like, for me, my biggest problem was I just worked too much because I needed a lot of activity to stimulate my brain all the time. So I always had lots of things juggling. But, I didn't actually really realize till even recently, to be honest, I was like, okay, like, at least that's sort of encouraged in our working world, right? That's working on doing all these things, keeping busy was sort of a thing that, at least for a while until now, we're all more recognizing of like, having to slow down, take a break. But it was celebrated if you were able to work and do different things and all that. So kind of indulge in it. And I realized, that was just really a coping strategy to keep my brain focused and not wanting that downtime because it's actually a dopamine thing. It was like, it was like self-medication. Like some people wanted to, I guess, drink a lot of coffee. Like lots of people I know with ADHD drink lots of coffee to self-medicate. So did I. And then I basically cut my coffee use down to like almost zero now because my medications are so much more stable. So it's sort of, I think that's why it's important to have that conversation, or just because it seems like someone has this really successful thing on the outside. Well, I think like that compensation strategy then actually leads to a lot of negative things in your life, like, sort of broken relationships with people and family and whatever, which I'm just sort of being able to put back now because I go, oh, okay, that's it. Like I have to now understand how to balance the rest of my life because my compensation strategy to keep me focused and all that is good on one level, but it's not always good on one. You need to have a balance of all those things. And it comes with understanding how your brain works and why you're motivated to do that, and just do something to correct the course.
No, it's interesting hearing that, because like when you grow up, obviously you have kids with ADHD and ADD, and you sort of think, well, the way that the schools are structured or for the teaching, if they just sort of knew that, or the teachers, I know the teachers have a lot on their plates to do at the moment, they've got to be everything, but if they actually knew that this kid can be hyper focused on something he's really passionate about, that's the stuff you'd want to push him towards. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of the schools are geared to that sort of thing. So I can see how, you know, a person, let's say early on, who's diagnosed or has it early on going through school could find it really difficult.
Oh, it's a really good point, actually, because I really want to stress just how ADHD is so different in everybody. So I know there's a lot of people who say, oh, you know, if you've got ADHD, you really struggle in school, you get fail grades. And I'm like, no, I was a straight A student. The only subjects I didn't do very well on was like maths and physics. And the school comments on those reports was interesting. It felt like Jekyll and Hyde. It was like, Rachel was amazing. And the model student in history and English, to look at my maths and physics, it's like, it's all the very classic ADHD things. She's like, she needs to try harder. She's just like, blah, blah, blah. I was like, what the hell? I'm the same person. It's just like different subjects, you know.
But no interest in it, obviously. No interest in maths and physics. And
yeah, it's just so extreme. And there's these typical words that are thrown out, right? People who are undiagnosed ADHD, and everyone realizes that they get diagnosed. They go, oh my God, but in my school reports, I was told I was lazy, I just didn't try hard enough, or I should just pay attention more. I mean, those very typical phrases. But for someone like me, like, that's it. It's sort of like the common narrative was often, you know, just you failed school and all that. But I go, no, me and quite a lot of women, not all, like I know, you know, one of my own employees, my company, for example, was diagnosed hyperactive ADHD. She really struggled in school and only really got her mark in uni. So, like, that's why I really want to stress it's important to have those different stories, because, like, yeah, what's common is these symptoms and, you know, and sort of the challenges are simple, but the situations that happen, the growing up process, we have to be very careful about stereotyping too much of it, because, yeah, everyone's experience is different.
What's the prevalence of ADD or ADHD in the population?
In Australia, and it was a very significant report that was put out by Deloitte Economics 2019. It said that based on their very thorough analysis, about at least 800,000 Australians have ADHD. And this was based on scientific research. And again, I still strongly believe that's an underestimate. I think they said at least 500,000 plus were definitely over the age of 18, you know, so kind of really recognizing the adult population. It's the first proper economic statistical analysis of ADHD in Australia, which is remarkable, but most global studies have put the prevalence in percentage terms between 2 to 4%, right, of the population, basically. Again, it's still an underestimate probably, but yeah, it's a lot.
I'm just thinking because, like, you know, the way we have systems set up, let's say at school, you want to be a teacher, do 3 years at uni, and you do your rounds for 6 months and you're in there. Like, it just seems to me that they're lacking this sort of component of, let's say, neurodiverse sort of awareness. Like, you know, for me, I'm learning a lot right now talking to you, but like just having a neurodiverse sort of training, obviously, which we took with for your resources and stuff, but like just with teachers and I just think it would help a lot more people, and it would save a lot of emotional heartache for people growing up or just in their adulthood thinking they're maybe, let's say, stupid or whatever, and they're not. They just don't have the correct diagnosis or being aware that that's a possibility for them.
100%, yeah. I think, you know, I think it's very interesting, right? It's because I started in the adult workplace space, but there's just so much potential to really explore kind of that high school and primary school age and teachers training, I suppose, because in terms of education, I've only focused on giving talks to, you know, corporates and businesses and stuff, just as a lunch and learn style thing to kind of go like basically this podcast episode really is like, what is neurodiversity and going through that stuff, but also equipping them with, you know, practical strategies that have worked for other businesses who've employed autistic and ADHD, for example, or, you know, or just even from my own lived experience. So combining the best of both worlds and also like the scientific research on that for education. But yeah, when it comes to schools and teachers and all of that, like there is also research there and there's that, but it's still, yeah, really, really early days, which is really remarkable considering that, you know, like ADHD and autism clearly are more diagnosed in kids, not enough. Yeah. You sort of feel like that should have been more advanced by now, but it's not. It's sort of it started kind of with the workplace first in a way. But I mean, it's just been tandem, right? It's sort of, you can't speak of one or read out the other. You have to kind of go through the whole sort of life cycle, I suppose, of education to employment, which is sort of kind of where I am with NeuroDiversity Media is how you joined the dots there. I started the workplace because that was just the natural starting point, but it's funny, right? Because I always kind of go, well, teaching was always kind of my calling, I suppose, in life. But I just did not see myself as a high school teacher at the time. Because it's like I would not stand the admin of paperwork that came with being a teacher. I was like, no, I would not do that. So the next best thing is to be an entrepreneur. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like, the way they would do uni, I would not imagine there would be, I don't know what they do from a behavioural type of thing, but I would not imagine that the way it's structured would have this even mentioned about it. It might be how do you handle a bad kid or whatever, but there would be nothing about, well, this is what you might want to run through. Do you know if the kid's got this, or things like that? I just think it could make for a lot happier workplace for everyone if this sort of stuff could be implemented, let's say, at a teaching level, education level at least.
Oh, 100%, yeah. There's just so much work to be done. And I think it is positive. There's lots of people speaking up now. But I think for me, that's why I always kind of say this business goes back to like first principles of what is the real problem stopping people from employment or getting that good education. It really goes back to the stigma, bias and prejudice and stereotypes of that's often reinforced by media. And so you have to kind of challenge that by producing media that is also going to challenge that and show representative stories of lots of people who go through the same thing. Because then you realize, oh, you're not alone, I suppose, with people who really feel like they are. But also it's to broaden the minds of lots of people who may have only one image or one idea of what it is, and the best what it is, and it's actually scientifically proven. It's storytelling is the best way to sort of change people's minds in a sense, and also showing those different representations that directly challenge a stereotype is also very effective.
I think it's great. Yeah, absolutely. Stories is the best way generally to get through to people with this sort of stuff. Now, so let's talk about now I want to touch on about autism real quickly as well. So people think they know what autism, they know the word. I don't think they actually know really what the condition is. They might have a relation, as you said earlier, that has it. I've actually got a cousin who's got it. So, but maybe do you want to explain a bit, what is autism? What is it to you? Misconceptions about it, just a bit of a general overview. Sure,
yeah. I mean, autism it's an interesting one, right? So, for me, it's about the struggles to understand social cues. It's sort of, I know the DSM kind of goes, and then that repetitive behavior, that struggles social cues, maybe the sensory sensitivity is one factor, etc. But I think it is just sort of that navigating that social environment is sort of that biggest challenge for me, and is sort of typical of that. So for most girls, sort of like we can pretend and read cues. So it doesn't come naturally to us. So that's a really big thing. And as well, even to this day, I think sometimes I still find it, I'm like 2 seconds behind reading on sarcasm as well. Those kind of like things as well, I suppose that is the biggest challenge, right, is sort of also a lot to do with executive function for me. Certain things, as I mentioned, is a struggle to do over others. There is a lot of overlap between autism and ADHD, I find. But for autism, for me, it's just kind of really, for me, about that social sort of challenges of, which is hard to believe because the ADHD does sort of help with that in overcoming some of that. But in a lot of day-to-day situations, personal situations, like dating, all that, like it's just kind of been a huge barrier, right? Just not knowing the cues, not understanding cues, perhaps making an inappropriate comment or whatever, because I'm just not reading the social cues. I'm not really picking up the social manners or whatever to sort of continue that conversation more tactful way. So just lots of misunderstandings for me, which has been really deeply frustrating. And that's sort of, I think I speak quite a lot from that female perspective, because obviously then autism boys can present in a more rigid, stereotypical behavior. Not always. I do not know a lot of men who don't do that. They're just kind of a bit like me, actually. But autism, unfortunately, like ADHD, it's a spectrum for a reason. Like it does, but it's usually that social struggle is usually the core of it, I find. And then everyone sort of has, the repetitive behaviors in other ways, the stimming, so the sensory thing is a big one. Yeah, so that's kind of how I sort of define it.
So after you got your diagnosis at 25, like I can imagine it would have been a massive relief and you would have made a lot of sense. So what did you do next? Was it something like you get on, like, is there something, how do you, like, let's say, address it or do you treat it? I'm not really sure about that. So can you maybe explain a bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, with autism, right, it's sort of, that's it, right? Unlike ADHD, there's no, like, medication per se, which is probably good because there's a lot of terrible sort of, anti-vaxxers and people out there who talk all these crazy cures. They're like, no, do not, it's not about curing autism. it's like there's a reason why we've existed. This autism has existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Like it's an evolution.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to say that because I'm always one to say, but what do you think about that whole? Does that annoy you, that whole anti-vax thing about the bloody vaccines and linking it to autism?
Well, I think it's an unfortunate case study of how a misreporting or misrepresentation of a so-called scientific study done in the 90s somehow continues to hold root in today's society as some kind of proof that vaccines cause autism, even though it's been thoroughly debunked. But there you go. Once a bad idea takes root,
it's crazy, isn't it? It's so frustrating. It's unbelievable because in my role we have my boss is pretty well known, and we posted a picture of him getting a vaccine, and that was a bad idea on Twitter. Twitter's probably the worst place to post it, and I couldn't believe some of the comments we were getting out of it. It's just astounding.
And I think it just goes to the root of like autism being that spectrum, because I think genuinely there are quite a lot of people who may have kids with autism and other intellectual disability challenges and all that, and that can be really hard to handle. And so it's sort of like if it feels like if you're stuck with that, it's sort of terrible, blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, well, but also like there is quite a big portion of the spectrum that are able to function fine with just additional supports and all that. Like supports, it just all depends. Like that's what I mean. So once it just gets fixated on that one portion of the spectrum, then that you think that's all of it. You go, no, you have to challenge yourself all the time. Go, no, it's all of it. So yeah, with the anti-vaxxers and thing, it's sort of like that's it. It's just so hard to keep. You have to keep challenging it. That's it, right? Because people are afraid of what they do not know, and you have to keep putting out narratives to continually challenge that and show them that it's not the case, So that's how I feel about it anyway.
No, I'm glad you mentioned it. I was sort of thinking in the back of my head, and I can imagine how it'd be quite annoying. Now let's talk about what you did regarding your business, because I love this. I love people who take a passion and then they make themselves into a business. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I presume that's what you've done. You've taken a passion, and where there's a lack of content in this area, lack of resources, I'm going to do something about it, and then you've actually monetized it and made it into a business, which is even more impressive. So maybe do you want to talk about that journey itself, or how you've done that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's kind of funny, right? Because it's like it's always go, how do you distill a story with many complex moving parts into one single narrative, right? And so for me, it's sort of, yes, there was the story mentioned earlier in the podcast, right, which is about how I sort of really drawn from that personal experience, the lived experience. And I guess true to the name of this podcast, right? It's the lived experience that really drives kind of how I've approached developing the business and the product in itself, because I just believe that that stories of lived experiences is what will help people, gain strategies and understand, how to relate to people, I suppose, and how to help them, I suppose. You feel compelled to act after a really good story, like that's a good story may compel people to help in ways that you never know, but it's important to know how to produce those types of stories and put them out. And the journalism background I have is what sort of helps me with that understanding. So in the marketing aspect of me working in law firms, where it's about translating difficult to understand information for the average person to that and how to distribute it in different channels is also a really important part of it, because you can't produce something, like I always like to say, you've wasted your money if you just focus on producing stuff but you have no strategy to distribute the content. Like I feel like if I was a journalist and I never thought about that, I'll be fired from it. So that's why I always thought it was it. So that's that combination of, yes, my lived experience, my passion in solving a problem that I thought needed to be solved. I've solved it for myself. I solved it for lots of people. And just knowing how to get that out to a mass audience, often through organic sort of methods, because word of mouth is always the best sort of way to kind of, spread the word about the business and get people through. And then, for me, it's just been a really big journey from, I guess that's the thing. It's sort of like journalism and media is one of the toughest places to monetize, but it was having to take a bit of a conceptual leap to go, okay, like that's it. Everyone keeps saying to me, we all came to this resource library to learn about neurodiversity, to learn from stories, to learn from resources. And I go, okay, so maybe the next step up is providing education type products, learning products for, for specific groups, so corporates or schools or all that, through talking and consulting, all that. And so that's kind of how I join the dots, at least right now, on monetizing the business, because it's sort of challenging to monetize just on the journalism alone. And it is about connecting the dots with, well, education people are usually willing to pay for certain groups. And I think that's why I focus on professionals, that missing middle group that I like to talk about of us, because we usually do have that, disposable income to afford these upgrades to our, we will pay for education, we'll pay for continuing development. And for me, that is crucial to kind of hopefully the bigger social mission of the business, which is to get information out to anybody, regardless of the income level, as long as there's a core group of people who are going to help to, support it, I suppose, for their own needs. So that's kind of how I've sort of thought about the development of the business. And to be honest, it's still ongoing. It's always an iterative process.
Now, what's your feedback been from people in regards to resources? Are there any good stories you can share about someone's read it and it's helped them, or what's some good sort of stuff that's come out of it?
I had my very first, with my business, so it's like Resource Library. You can join as a free member. It's like getting a library membership, your local library, and then there's an upgrade for $99 for those learning resources. So the story I wanted to share on that was my first pro member, that's what we call those members, signed up. And she had no connection to the business at all. She found it through Google. And so that's it. Lots of people find my business via the organic search through the articles I put out that rank on Google.
SEO, yeah.
SEO, that's
SEO,
it.
Search engine,
just built on SEO.
Search engine optimization, yeah.
It seems unsexy compared to other paid marketing things, but it is SEO. And yeah, she just stumbled across it, read it, signed up for free, and then realized she could upgrade, and then she upgraded. But it was because at the time she was in a really, really dark situation in her workplace where she felt like she was being discriminated against because of ADHD, sort of getting the whole performance management treatment and all that. And she had read our ADHD Rights at Work legal guide, of which I had consulted with an expert employment lawyer to produce this guide. And we've also illustrated it with pictures as well of your rights to make it more accessible, because, it's sort of, even the most simplest language, it can be very daunting to understand your rights unless you put in pictures. So with this guide, she, really understood what to do in that situation and was able to, eventually escape that workplace and just felt empowered, in terms of her rights and what to do, because that's it. When you're in that situation, you don't know what to do and you think lawyers are really expensive. That's kind of where information like this, especially written by someone, like me and others who've collaborated on it, really, that's it. And that story for me is just always just felt like exactly the reason I created this business, is because it's like, yeah, that information, that expertise, the evidence base is kind of really can really make a huge difference in your workplace, your rights, and just who you are as a person. So, yeah.
It's great to have that win so early on as well, being your first person as well, to have that win just to reinforce it, and away you go.
Yeah.
But I was going to say as well, what's the feedback from you? You've mentioned corporates before. You do talks for businesses and stuff like that. So how does that sort of come about? Do they find, do you get recommended, or do they have people in the workplace who might have ADHD or something that we've become aware of, or how does that sort of normally go?
Well, I think my favourite story on this one, and I can say it as well because they've posted about it on LinkedIn, is the Sydney Opera House. The Sydney Opera House found me, believe it or not. They found me via a YouTube video of an interview I did back in June 2020 last year, when I hadn't. So I should say the Resource Library was only launched in August 2020 last year. And so the Sydney Opera House one of their staff happened to find this video and passed it on to their D&I staff and said they loved it so much that they came to me and said, you know what, we've been talking about neurodiversity, and we want you to share your story with our staff as a lunch and learn on neurodiversity at work. And so that's kind of what I did in terms of giving that talk, and the feedback from that was it was really informative and great. And so I think from that experience, right, that sort of helped me with another organization who also contacted me to do that. And I suppose that's kind of where I did. It was like I sort of didn't consciously go out to create this product per se. It was because people went, I really because of the journalism, because of the content you produce, I basically made myself an authority that's worthy of doing those speaking education gigs. And so that's how I evolved now to sort of have more formalized offering, which I now reach out to others. And I suppose that's it. It comes from when it comes to feedback from corporates, it's sort of, or organizations, it comes from they're aware of, curious like yourself, like neurodiversity is a thing and we should probably know about it. And what do we do? And so in the messages in these talks, I suppose I kind of go, you already have neurodivergent people in your organization already, you just don't know about it. So it is in your interest to learn about this, because you might actually improve in productivity, of your organization, almost like, in a few months or overnight, just by knowing, these simple strategies. And people may not need to feel like they have to disclose or show that, but they'll be very appreciative of it. And then maybe they might want to do that because just like LGBTI and women and other sort of identities, people want to be loud and proud about who they are. They want to be their authentic self in the workplace. So that's kind of where the feedback has been, right, from organizations who are proactively sort of understanding that this is something that matters, not only from an authentic workplace, authentic self kind of thing, but also like it can actually help their business in general. So that's a win-win sort of situation.
And based on the start, that's the stats you said before. They're going to have people in the workplace with it. It's just based on data, they're going to have it. And I think, as you said, what you said earlier was really, really, I think, important, was the timeline with 20, 30 years behind where mental health was in regards to stigma. I think it's sort of, it will get to the stage eventually when someone's proud to say, I've got autism or ADHD. They're proud to let people know and educate people. Whereas mental health 20, 30 years ago, there'd be no way you get people with bipolar saying to people, I've got bipolar, this is what bipolar is. Whereas now they're probably there's a lot more awareness around that, and they will do that.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's kind of it. And also, there's a reason for why I did really, really well in history in school, is because I also like to look at the history of social movements in general, seeing how women's rights, LGBTI, how, mental health and all of that progress. And it always really starts from huge dark ages where there's a lack of information. And then there's always either a big celebrity or some kind of big, prominent figure pushed through the media that always then starts cracking the conversation up. So then it becomes a reported thing. And then there's always then some kind of, push by, inside media ranks where people who have that lived experience start being able to report on that, or they're more conscious of reaching out to those underrepresented groups and make that a priority. And then that's why I kind of made media sort of awareness and quality journalism a big focus of my business, because you can see it in history that it's a huge contributing force to why people then start caring about, all sorts of support programs, where it's women, LGBTI, all the things that we see today. Like, this month is Pride Month, for LGBTI, for lots of organizations with all the rainbows and everything. It's sort of like, it just starts with, just people. One, yes, there's a huge social activism kind of part where people really speak out, and there's a huge part of neurodiversity, but then it's just sharing the stories and the prominent individuals who share those stories as well, that just really gets things going. But it takes years. So it took, as you mentioned, it took 10, 20 years for mental health to get to where it is today.
Yeah, and it's still a long way to go, and then like everything else. But I was going to say, is there anyone of prominence who has sort of done that already for, let's say, the neurodivergent cause? Is there sort of anyone that should, or that you've seen? Because I'm sort of like, for me, it's like awareness. Yeah, because like when you learn about this thing, you go, geez, why is there no more awareness around this? Because just how prevalent it is. So who do you see that championing that, or how do you see that sort of awareness being run?
That is very interesting, right? Because I would say in this time of recording, right, it's sort of like the most prominent one recently would be Elon Musk himself. He was like saying, I must be the first Asperger's person to host Saturday Night Live, right?
My boss, I know he's the head founder of Jim's Mulling, and he's self-proclaimed, says his wife thinks he's got Asperger's, but he doesn't, but I reckon he does. So there's a lot of
absolutely, right. And like, some people may even suggest Bill Gates may have it, but also but Elon Musk has come out strongly on that. Like that's what I mean, like in terms of neurodiversity. Like in Australia, like Hannah Gadsby, the comedian, has spoken up a lot about autism and kind of really shining that light on that neurodiversity perspective, right? That she doesn't think it's a problem, it's just part of it. I think she has autism and ADHD actually, but like, that's her last show talked a lot about that, putting that really square in front in that sort of cycle. But also, thanks to social media and like, things like TikTok and stuff, there is people like Chloe Hayden, who's a young autistic woman who really finds an entertaining way to educate people, huge audiences about autism. So I guess it's funny, right? Is there one champion or one sort of thing? Well, I think kind of consistent with the world that we're in today, of the media world, there is no sort of one person or one thing that could represent all. It's all these different figures that kind of step in, sort of contribute in their own way to lead the neurodiversity movement in a way. It just kind of depends on how prominent they are, I suppose. I mean, you probably can't get any more prominent than Elon Musk in a sense.
True. Yeah, and that's quite interesting. Do you think, going back to earlier, you said obviously they're all separate conditions and they need different things, but do you think that needs to sort of almost, as you said, come under that one banner of, and that's what needs to be awareness of raised around, let's say, the term neurodiverse, as opposed to, let's say, autism and ADHD individual things? Or how would you think of that?
Yeah, actually, it's a good point where you bring it up there, right? Because even terminology is always interesting, right? So it's sort of like neurodiverse. What is neurodiverse versus neurodivergent? Now, I'm probably a bit of a grammatical nerd. I'm like, neurodiverse in itself isn't like some kind of noun or whatever. It's sort of, if you want to say neurodiverse, you say neurodiverse population or something like that, right? And neurodivergent is sort of maybe the better word to describe people. But the truth is, people sometimes actually just prefer to use neurodiverse rather than neurodivergent. So I've kind of just accepted it's interchangeable.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to make that point, because I know terminology can be kind of confusing at first to understand. I think, sorry, just actually, what was your question again?
I was just sort of saying, like, for the awareness cause itself, I'll give you an example, right? So let's say with Beyond Blue and stuff, this term mental health it's mental health, but apparently mental health has to have schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, and anxiety, which probably take all the attention. And you have all these other conditions as well, BPD. But the term mental health, there's sort of a couple of things. So I'm just sort of thinking with this, like, we're talking about ADHD, autism, and there's obviously other things as well, which would be under neurodiverse. Does it need to sort of unify, let's say, for a branding or an awareness point of view, under that term neurodiverse?
Yeah,
sort of for the people to sort of go, hey, all right, well, that neurodiverse can mean this, just to sort of get more, as opposed to having individual causes have to be championed?
Yes, I believe so. And that's because there's a very important point that I wanted to definitely make on that point, is because people like me are diagnosed with multiple conditions. It's not just one. But unfortunately, like when you read about neurodiversity hiring programs, for example, they actually only just refer to autism. It's very misleading, right? And you kind of go, actually, the research says statistically up to 30 to 50% of people who have autism may also have ADHD. So you kind of go, you can't really say, there's an autistic person when you probably have ADHD. And you go, it's a bit of a mouthful to say autistic, ADHD, dyspraxic, You come on and say neurodivergent, right? I kind of see it like, it's a bit like LGBTI is sort of like the collective term for, whether you're bisexual, gay, or whatever. I go, okay, that's why I think neurodivergent is a nice collective term, and also neurodiversity in the same way that LGBTIQ, A+, that whole acronym, the same thing. It's sort of like you probably want to have an umbrella term for that diversity of conditions, or like diversity of sexualities as well. So I feel like that's I think it's important to still have that uniting under that, because I just think statistically lots of people fall in the category of having those multiple conditions, but feeling like they have to like kind of choose between the conditions, and there's just that siloing effect, which is what actually hinders progress in this space for recognition rather than enhances it. So I actually find it a personal bugbear, to be honest, because it's just like, it's just one thing but the other. So it's just a collection of all of them.
Sure. Now, we've gone for nearly an hour then, so I've gone for 20 minutes more than what I say we did. But thank you very much for joining me, Rachel. So if anyone wants to learn more about what you do and the resources, where can they go and where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. So the website's www.neurodiversitymedia.com. You can join for free. There's a join button on the page to just unlock the full library of resources. And on social media, we're just Neurodiversity Media, really. So just search for that and you'll find all the handles.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Rachel. It was really, really interesting. And I've got a cousin with autism. I've learned a lot. And I just, I can't wait. Hopefully the awareness, let's say the stigma sort of gets to where, a lot more people start coming out and start saying things the same way they have with mental health, and sort of progress it to sort of that sort of level of awareness. So,
thank you so much, Joel. I really appreciate this chat. It's been great.
No, thanks, Rachel. So, thanks for that, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's